The first scream wasn't human. It was the tearing cry of a wounded stallion, echoing off the canyon walls like a warning from the earth itself. Rian Calder didn't slow his stride. The wind carried the smell of burning cedar and the faint, metallic taste of blood. Above the jagged rim of Blackthorn Ridge, the sky was bruised purple, the sun already sinking into the teeth of the mountains. Somewhere ahead, the Hollow Spur mercenaries were waiting. A dozen men who'd carved their reputation from the bones of anyone foolish enough to stand in their way. They'd taken his cargo, they'd taken his horse, and they'd left him breathing, which was their first mistake. Rian's boots crunched over loose shale as he moved through the narrow pass, his long coat snapping in the wind. His right hand hovered near the worn grip of his ironwood-handled revolver, the weapon's weight as familiar as his own heartbeat. A shadow shifted on the ridge above, too quick to be a trick of the light. Rian dropped to one knee just as a rifle cracked, the bullet sparking off the stone where his head had been. He rolled, came up in a crouch, and fired once. The figure above pitched forward, tumbling down the slope in a spray of dust and gravel. The canyon swallowed the sound of the body hitting the ground. Shouts rose from deeper in the pass. Rough voices, the kind that carried the confidence of men who'd killed before and expected to kill again. The Hollow Spur didn't just hunt for money. They hunted for the thrill of it. Rian moved quickly, hugging the canyon wall, his eyes scanning for the next threat. The air was cooling fast, the shadows thickening, and every sound seemed sharper. The rattle of loose stones under a boot, the faint jingle of spurs, the whisper of leather against a rifle stock. Two men appeared ahead, blocking the narrow trail. One was tall and broad, his face hidden under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. The other was weary, with a scar running from his ear to the corner of his mouth. "You're a long way from safety, Calder," the tall one called, his voice carrying easily in the still air. Rian didn't answer. He stepped forward, his revolver steady, his gaze locked on theirs. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. The weary one moved first, raising his rifle to slow. Rian's shot took him in the chest, the sound echoing like a hammer strike. The tall one lunged, drawing a knife, but Rian sidestepped, caught his wrist, and slammed the man into the canyon wall. The knife clattered to the ground. A second later, so did the man. The wind shifted, carrying with it the low, deliberate sound of hooves. Rian turned toward the canyon's mouth. Garen Holt, leader of the Hollow Spur, a man whose name was spoken in the same tone as a rattlesnake's warning. He rode a black mare with eyes like wet coal, his long coat trailing behind him like a shadow. "You've cost me men, Calder," Holt said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "And I don't take kindly to debts unpaid." Rian's jaw tightened. "Then you'll hate what comes next." The standoff was silent, but electric. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Holt's hand twitched toward his revolver, and Rian moved. Two shots cracked in the stillness. Holt's mare reared, screaming, as her rider toppled sideways into the dust. The remaining mercenaries froze. Without their leader, their bravado drained away like water through sand. One by one, they backed off, disappearing into the shadows of the ridge. Rian stood alone in the cooling air, the wind tugging at his coat. The canyon was littered with the echoes of violence, the smell of gunpowder, the scuff marks of boots, the still forms of the fallen. He holstered his revolver and looked toward the horizon. The sun was gone now, leaving only the deep indigo of night. Somewhere out there, more men like the Hollow Spur would come. They always did. But for tonight, Blackthorn Ridge was his. The silence after a fight was never clean. It clung to Rian Calder like smoke, seeping into his skin, settling in the spaces between his thoughts. Blackthorn Ridge lay behind him now, a jagged scar against the night sky. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of cold stone and the faint sweetness of sagebrush. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, a long, mournful sound that seemed to stretch the darkness even further. Rian walked. Each step crunched over the brittle earth, the sound loud in the emptiness. His revolver was back in its holster, but his hand kept brushing the grip, a habit he couldn't shake. The Hollow Spur were finished, but he knew better than to believe that meant safety. In the west, killing one pack of wolves only made room for another. He reached a shallow rise and stopped. Below, in the basin, The faint glow of lanterns marked the edge of a settlement, a scatter of buildings huddled against the wind. The place had no name on any map, but Rian had been here before, years ago, before the war, before the debt, before the hollow spur had taken something from him he couldn't get back. The memory came uninvited. A woman's laugh, low and warm. The smell of fresh bread cooling on a windowsill. The way the light had caught in her hair when she'd turned to look at him. And then, the fire, the shouting, the sound of boots and breaking glass. Rian blinked hard, forcing the images away. The past was a weight, and if you carried it too long, it would break you. He started down toward the settlement. The first building he reached was the saloon, 2 stories of weathered timber, its sign swinging on rusted chains. Music drifted from inside, thin and tired, like the player had been at it too long. Rian pushed through the batwing doors. The room went quiet. Not completely. The piano kept playing. A few conversations murmured on, but the shift was there. People noticed him. The dust on his coat, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the room without lingering. He crossed to the bar. The barkeep, a heavy-set man with a beard gone mostly gray, poured a drink without being asked. "Didn't think I'd see you back here," the barkeep said, sliding the glass across. "Didn't think I'd come back," Rian replied. He took a sip, whiskey, sharp and smoky. The barkeep leaned in slightly. "Word is, you cleaned out the hollow spur." Rian didn't answer. The barkeep's voice dropped lower. "Word is, someone paid them to take you out." That made Rian pause. He set the glass down slowly. "Who?" The barkeep shook his head. "Don't know. But whoever it is, they've got reach. And they're not done." Before Rian could respond, the saloon doors creaked open. A woman stepped inside, tall, with a long duster coat and a rifle slung across her back. Her eyes found Rian immediately. "Calder," she said, her voice carrying over the low hum of the room. "We need to talk." He studied her for a moment. He didn't know her, but there was something in the way she stood, balanced, ready, that told him she wasn't here by accident. "Then talk," he said. "Not here." She glanced toward the door. Too many ears. Rian finished his drink, set the glass down, and followed her outside. The street was empty, the night air sharp. She led him toward the edge of town, where the lantern light faded into shadow. "My name's Elara Voss," she said finally. "I've been tracking the same people who hired the hollow spur. They're moving through the territories, buying loyalty with gold and fear. And they've got a list." Rian's voice was flat. "I'm on it," she nodded. Near the top, the wind picked up, tugging at her coat. "If you stay here, they'll send more. If you run, they'll follow. The only way this ends is if we take the fight to them." Rian looked past her, toward the dark line of the horizon. He'd spent years avoiding cousins, avoiding alliances, but something in her tone, in the certainty of it, told him this wasn't just another job. "Where?" he asked. Elara's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "A place called Ash Hollow. 3 days ride north. But we'll have company before we get there." Rian adjusted the brim of his hat. "Then we'd better start moving." They walked into the night, the sound of their boots fading into the wind. Behind them, the town's lanterns flickered like dying stars. Ahead, the land stretched wide and empty, the kind of emptiness that could swallow a man whole. And somewhere out there, the next fight was already waiting. The night was a black ocean, and the 2 riders were nothing but shadows moving through it. Rian Calder kept his mare at a steady lope, the leather creaking under him, the rhythm of hooves a low drumbeat against the silence. Beside him, Elara Voss rode with the easy balance of someone who'd spent more years in the saddle than on solid ground. Neither spoke for the first hour. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint, dry tang of dust. Somewhere far behind them, the settlement's lanterns had vanished. Ahead, the land stretched into a vast, moonlit emptiness. "You've been here before," Elara said finally, her voice low but clear over the wind. Rian didn't look at her. "Once, long time ago." "What happened?" He kept his eyes on the horizon. "I left." She didn't press. The trail narrowed as they entered a stretch of broken country. Jagged rock outcrops, gullies deep enough to swallow a horse. The moonlight painted everything in silver and shadow. turning the land into something both beautiful and dangerous. It was in one of those shadows that Rian saw movement. He raised a hand, and both horses slowed to a halt. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then, the faint scrape of metal on stone. Ambush, Rian murmured. The first shot came from the ridge to their left, sparking off the rock near Elara's stirrup. She swung down from her horse in one fluid motion, rifle already in her hands. Rian dismounted on the other side, drawing his revolver. Figures emerged from the rocks. 6 of them, faces hidden behind scarves, eyes glinting in the moonlight. They moved with the confidence of men who thought they had the advantage. "You're a long way from Ash Hollow," one of them called. His voice was mocking, but there was an edge to it. "Closer than you'll ever be," Rian replied. The fight was fast and brutal. Rian's revolver barked in the night, each shot precise, deliberate. Elara's rifle cracked, the sound echoing off the stone walls. The attackers moved like wolves, trying to circle, but the narrow terrain worked against them. One rushed Rian with a knife, too close for a clean shot. Rian caught his wrist, twisted hard, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. Another tried to flank Elara, but she pivoted, firing point blank. When the last man fell, the only sounds were the ragged breathing of the horses and the slow settling of dust. Elara reloaded her rifle, her hands steady. "They weren't hollow spur, no," Rian said, scanning the bodies. "These were hired. Different cut of trouble." She glanced at him. "Means they know we're coming." Rian holstered his revolver. "Good. Saves us the trouble of knocking." They remounted and rode on. The land began to change. The air cooler, the ground softer under the horses' hooves. In the distance, the faint outline of a ravine cut across the plain like a scar. "That's Ash Hollow," Elara said. Rian studied it in the moonlight. The place looked dead, but he knew better. Places like that were never empty. They just waited for you to step inside. As they approached, the wind carried a new sound, faint, metallic, like chains rattling in the dark. Elara's voice was barely a whisper. "They're here." Rian's hand rested on his revolver. "Then let's finish this." They rode into the hollow, the shadows swallowing them whole. Ash Hollow didn't welcome strangers. It swallowed them. The ravine walls rose high on either side, jagged and close enough that the moonlight barely touched the ground. The air was still, heavy, as if the place itself was holding its breath. Rian Calder and Elara Voss rode in single file, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft, sandy floor. Every instinct in Rian's body was on edge. The hollow was too quiet. No wind, no night birds, just the faint creak of leather and the slow, steady rhythm of their mounts. Halfway in, the smell hit him, faint, metallic, and wrong. Blood, old, but not old enough. "Stop," he murmured. Elara reined in, scanning the shadows. "You see something?" "Not yet," Rian said, "but it's here." The first sign came from above, a pebble skittering down the wall to their right. Then another. Then the sharp, unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. Down. Rian barked. They slid from their saddles just as gunfire erupted from both sides of the ravine. Bullets sparked off the rock, sending shards of stone into the air. The horses screamed and bolted deeper into the hollow. Rian and Elara dove behind a cluster of boulders, the air thick with dust and the acrid bite of gunpowder. "They've got the high ground," Elara said, reloading her rifle with quick, practiced movements. "Not for long," Rian replied. He scanned the walls, noting the narrow ledges and the way the shooters moved between them. They were disciplined, not bandits, but trained guns. Whoever had hired the hollow spur had sent their best this time. Rian pulled a small, battered tin from his coat pocket. Inside were 3 cartridges with dull, blackened tips. He loaded them into his revolver without a word. "What are those?" Elara asked. "Smoke rounds," he said. "Bought 'em off a miner in Redwater. Said they'd choke a tunnel full of men in seconds." He aimed high, toward a cluster of shadows on the left wall, and fired. The round hit the rock and burst into a thick, rolling cloud of gray. Shouts erupted from above as the shooters coughed and stumbled. "Move!" Rian shouted. They broke from cover, sprinting toward a narrow cut in the ravine wall. Bullets still chased them, but the smoke gave them just enough cover to reach the base of the ledge. Rian went up first, his boots finding holes in the rough stone. Elara followed, her rifle slung across her back. They moved fast, silent, until they were above the shooters. The fight turned quick. Rian's revolver barked in the dark, each shot finding its mark. Elara's rifle cracked, dropping to men before they could turn their guns. The rest scattered, retreating deeper into the hollow. But Rian didn't follow. He knew a retreat in a place like this was never clean. It was bait. Sure enough, as they reached the hollow's heart, the ground opened into a wide basin. In the center stood a cluster of wagons, their wheels half buried in sand. Lanterns hung from poles, casting a sickly yellow light over the scene. And waiting in that light was a man Rian had never seen before. Tall, lean, with a coat the color of dried blood and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Calder," the man said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "You've been making quite a mess." Rian's grip tightened on his revolver. "And you are?" "Call me Varric. I'm the one who cleans up messes like you." Round them, more gunmen stepped from the shadows. A dozen at least, rifles ready. Elara's voice was low. "We're boxed in." Rian's eyes flicked to the wagons. The lantern light glinted off something inside. Crates, stacked high, marked with a black sigil he didn't recognize. But he knew the shape of dynamite when he saw it. "Elara," he murmured, "when I move, shoot the lanterns." She didn't ask why. Varric took a step closer. "You could have walked away, Calder, but you kept pushing. Now you're out of road." Rian's reply was a single, sharp motion, his revolver coming up, firing not at Varric, but at the nearest crate. Elara's shots followed, shattering lanterns. Flames leapt, licking at the wood, racing toward the dynamite. The basin erupted in chaos. Gunmen shouted, scattering as the fire roared higher. Varric cursed, diving for cover. Rian grabbed Elara's arm. "Go." They ran, the heat at their backs, the air thick with smoke and the deafening crack of the first explosion. The blast lit the hollow like daylight, the shockwave chasing them up the ravine. They didn't stop until they were clear of the walls, the night air cool and sharp in their lungs. Behind them, Ash Hollow burned, the flames painting the sky in shades of orange and black. Elara looked at him, her face streaked with dust and sweat. "That was reckless." Rian managed a thin smile. "Reckless works," but as the firelight faded behind them, he knew Varric wasn't dead, and men like that didn't forgive. The fire over Ash Hollow had burned through the night, a pillar of smoke twisting into the stars. By morning, only blackened timbers and the smell of scorched earth remained. Rian Calder and Elara Voss had camped miles away, in a narrow draw where the wind couldn't carry their scent. The horses grazed in silence, their breath steaming in the cold dawn. Rian sat on a flat rock, sharpening his knife. The steady rasp of steel on stone was the only sound until Elara spoke. "He's alive," she said. Rian didn't look up. "I know, then you know he'll come hard. Varric's not the kind to lick his wounds and walk away." Rian slid the knife back into its sheath. "Good. I want him coming." Elara studied him for a moment. "Most men would run. I'm not most men." They broke camp quickly. The plan wasn't to hide. It was to strike first. Varric had resources, men, and a network that stretched across the territories. But Rian had something Varric didn't. A map in his head of every back trail, every forgotten pass, every place a man could disappear and reappear where he wasn't expected. By midday, they were riding hard toward the Red Mesa Flats, a stretch of open land broken by sandstone towers and dry creek beds. The wind here was constant, carrying fine dust that clung to skin and stung the eyes. It was in that dust that they saw the first sign, a single rider on the horizon, moving fast. "Scout," Elara said. Rian nodded. "Which means the rest aren't far." They angled their horses toward a narrow canyon ahead. The walls here were high and close, the ground littered with loose rock. Perfect for an ambush if you were the one setting it. They dismounted, leading the horses into a shadowed alcove. Rian climbed halfway up the canyon wall, finding a perch behind a jut of stone. Elara took position below, her rifle resting on a boulder. The first riders appeared minutes later, 4 of them, moving cautiously, eyes scanning the canyon. Behind them came more, the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels. Rian waited until the lead rider was directly below him. Then he dropped. The impact knocked the man from his saddle. Rian's revolver was in his hand before the others could react. Shots cracked, echoing off the stone. Elara's rifle barked, dropping a man from his horse. The canyon became a storm of dust and gunfire. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the air filled with the acrid bite of powder. Rian moved through it like a shadow, each shot deliberate, each step calculated. When the last echo faded, the canyon floor was littered with bodies and abandoned horses. Elara reloaded, her breathing steady. "That's not all of them, no," Rian said, scanning the horizon. "The rest will be with him." They mounted up again, riding hard toward the north. The land began to rise, the air cooling as they approached the foothills. Somewhere beyond those ridges, Varric was gathering what was left of his men. As the sun dipped low, they crested a hill, and there he was. Varric stood in the center of a wide basin, flanked by a dozen riders. His coat was torn, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes were cold and sharp. "You should have stayed in the hollow, Calder," he called. "Would have saved me the trouble." Rian's voice carried clear in the still air. "I don't make things easy for men like you." The standoff stretched, the wind whispering through the grass. Then Varric's hand twitched toward his gun. Rian was faster. The shot echoed across the basin, and Varric staggered, his revolver falling from his hand. The riders hesitated, and Elara's rifle cracked, sending them scattering. When the dust settled, Varric lay still. Rian holstered his gun, the weight of the moment settling over him. This fight was over, but in the west, there was always another shadow on the horizon. The basin was quiet now. Too quiet. The wind moved through the grass in slow waves, carrying away the last echoes of gunfire. Varric's body lay where it had fallen, his coat spread out like a dark stain against the pale earth. The other riders were gone, scattered into the hills, their loyalty dissolving the moment their leader hit the ground. Rian Calder stood over the scene for a long moment, his revolver still in his hand. The weight of it felt different now, heavier, as if the steel had absorbed the cost of every shot fired. Elara Voss approached, her boots whispering through the grass. She glanced at Varric's body, then at Rian. "It's done." Rian holstered his gun. For now, they didn't speak again until they'd ridden clear of the basin. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The land ahead stretched wide and empty, the kind of emptiness that could make a person feel both free and lost at the same time. At a shallow rise, they stopped. From here, the world seemed endless, ridges fading into the horizon. The air sharp with the scent of sage. Elara broke the silence. "You could walk away now. No one would follow." "Not after this." Rian's gaze stayed on the horizon. "There's always someone else. Another man like Varric. Another gang. Another fight." She studied him. "Then maybe it's not about them. Maybe it's about you." The words hung between them, heavier than the silence that followed. They made camp in a sheltered hollow, the firelight flickering against the stone walls. Rian sat with his back to the rock, cleaning his revolver. Elara tended the fire, her face lit in warm gold. "After a while," she said, "I'm heading east when this is over. There's work there, escort jobs, trade runs. Less killing." Rian looked at her across the fire. "And you think I should come with you? I think you've been riding alone too long." He didn't answer right away. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the night. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled. Finally, Rian said, "East is a long way from here." Elara's mouth curved into the faintest smile. So was Ash Hollow. They didn't decide that night. But when dawn came, and the first light touched the land, they rode out together. Not toward the nearest town, but toward the rising sun. The road ahead was uncertain, the dangers unseen. But for the first time in a long while, Rian Calder didn't feel like he was riding toward another fight. He was riding toward something else. The sun was barely a pale smear on the horizon when they broke camp. The air was cold enough to bite, the kind of cold that made leather stiff and breath hang in the air like smoke. Rian Calder adjusted the cinch on his mare, his movements slow and deliberate. Elara Voss was already mounted, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. They didn't speak for the first hour. The land around them was a rolling expanse of sage and dry grass, broken by the occasional outcrop of red stone. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from the people who had already shared enough danger to understand each other without words. But Rian's mind wasn't still. Varric was gone, but the man's shadow lingered. He'd been too well connected, too deliberate in his hunt. Someone had paid him, and that someone was still out there. By mid-morning, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, rhythmic sound. Hooves, Rian reined in, scanning the horizon. At first, there was nothing, just the shimmer of heat beginning to rise from the earth. Then he saw them, tiny specks moving in the far distance, catching the light like sparks. Riders, he said. Elara shaded her eyes with one hand. Too far to tell how many. Enough to matter, Rian replied. They pushed on, angling toward a line of low hills. The ground here was uneven, pocked with dry creek beds and scattered boulders. It would slow the riders behind them, but it also meant fewer escape routes if things went bad. By noon, the sky had turned a hard, cloudless blue. The riders were closer now. Rian could make out the glint of rifles, the way they moved in a loose but deliberate formation. Whoever they weren't just passing through. They reached the hills by early afternoon. The land here folded in on itself, creating narrow passes and hidden pockets of shadow. Rian led them into one such pass, the walls rising steep on either side. Trap? Elara asked. Only if we're slow, Rian said. They dismounted, leading the horses into a narrow cleft in the rock. From here, they could see the pass without being seen. Rian crouched low, his revolver in hand, while Elara set her rifle across a flat stone. The riders came into view minutes later. 8 of them, faces hidden behind dust scarves, their horses moving at a steady, ground-eating pace. They didn't look like Varric's men, but they had the same air of purpose. The lead rider slowed, scanning the pass. His eyes lingered on the shadows where Rian and Elara waited. Rian didn't hesitate. His first shot took the man cleanly, dropping him from the saddle. Elara's rifle cracked a heartbeat later, sending another rider tumbling. The pass erupted into chaos. Horses reared, men shouted, and gunfire echoed off the stone walls. Rian moved like water, shifting from cover to cover, his shots precise and final. Elara's rifle was a steady drumbeat beside him, each round finding its mark. One rider broke through, charging straight at Rian with a curved blade flashing in the sun. Rian sidestepped at the last moment, grabbing the man's arm and yanking him from the saddle. The blade clattered to the ground, and Rian's revolver ended the fight a second later. When the dust settled, only 2 riders remained. They turned their horses and fled, disappearing into the glare of the afternoon sun. Elara lowered her rifle. They'll bring more, Rian nodded. Then we keep moving. They retrieved their horses and rode hard until the sun began to sink. The land changed again, the hills giving way to a wide, flat plain dotted with the skeletal remains of old windmills. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was still clear. As night fell, they found shelter in the ruins of an abandoned way station. The walls were half collapsed, the roof sagging, but it was enough to keep the wind off. Over a small fire, Elara finally spoke. You think those riders were sent by the same people who hired Varric? Rian stared into the flames. I think we're getting close to finding out. She studied him for a moment. And when we do, he met her gaze. We finish it. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the broken shutters. Somewhere in the darkness, a lone horse whinnied, distant, but not distant enough. Rian's hand went to his revolver. The night wasn't done with them yet. The first sound was not a gunshot. It was the faint, deliberate crunch of boots on gravel, slow, measured, and far too close. Rian Calder's eyes snapped open. The fire in the ruined way station had burned down to embers, casting a dull orange glow over the broken walls. Elara Voss was already awake, crouched low with her rifle in hand, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the doorway. They hadn't posted a watch. They'd been riding hard for 2 days, and exhaustion had dulled their instincts. Now, the price for that mistake was walking toward them. Rian's hand found the grip of his revolver. He didn't move yet. He listened. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Then, a whisper of leather, the faint metallic click of a hammer being drawn back. Rian rolled sideways just as the first shot tore through the doorway, splintering the rotted wood. Elara's rifle barked in reply, the muzzle flash lighting her face for an instant, sharp eyes. Clenched jaw, no fear. Shadows moved outside, fast and low. More than one. They're circling, Rian said, his voice low. Elara nodded once. We hold them here. The next minutes were a blur of sound and motion. Gunfire cracked in the night, echoing off the stone walls. The air filled with the acrid bite of powder and the sharp tang of dust kicked up by bullets. Rian moved between the gaps in the wall, firing in short, precise bursts. Elara covered the flanks, her rifle steady even as the attackers pressed closer. One man tried to rush the doorway. Rian met him head-on, catching the barrel of his shotgun and slamming it upward. The blast tore a hole in the roof. Rian drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the dirt before finishing him with a single, cold shot. Another shadow slipped through a gap in the wall behind Elara. She spun. Too late, but Rian was already moving. His revolver roared, the attacker crumpling before he could bring his knife down. The fight dragged on, the attackers relentless. But slowly, the tide shifted. The ground outside was littered with still forms, the survivors melting back into the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Rian stood in the doorway, breathing hard, scanning the night. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of blood and gunpowder away into the emptiness. Elara joined him, her rifle still in her hands. They weren't just bounty hunters, she said. Rian crouched beside one of the fallen, pulling a small, leather-bound token from the man's coat. Stamped into the leather was a sigil, a coiled serpent wrapped around a spurred boot. He turned it over in his hand. I've seen this before. Where? Years ago. In the border towns. They called themselves the Iron Serpents. Smugglers, killers, and worse. They don't work for coin alone. They work for power. Elara's eyes narrowed. Then whoever's after you isn't just cleaning up loose ends. They're building something. Rian slipped the token into his coat. And we just made their list a lot shorter. They didn't sleep again that night. At first light, they saddled the horses and rode east, the ruins of the way station shrinking behind them. The land ahead was open and bright, but the weight of the night's fight clung to them like a second shadow. By midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked a wide valley. In the distance, smoke curled from a cluster of buildings, too much smoke for cooking fires. Elara reined in. That's not good. Rian's jaw tightened. No, that's a message. They rode down into the valley, the smell of burning growing stronger with every step. The town was small, a handful of homes, a saloon, a general store, and it was gone. Blackened beams jutted from the ashes, the air still hot from the fire. In the center of the street, nailed to a charred post, was another leather token. The serpent sigil stared back at them. Elara's voice was quiet. They're not just following us. They're ahead of us. Rian looked past the ruins, toward the far hills. Then we stop chasing shadows. We find their nest. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of hooves from somewhere beyond the ridge. Not many, maybe 3 or 4. Scouts. Rian swung into the saddle. Let's go hunting. The trail was old, but the signs were fresh. A broken horseshoe in the dust. A scrap of black cloth snagged on a mesquite branch. The faint, acrid scent of campfire smoke drifting on the wind. Rian Calder rode at a steady pace, his eyes scanning the land ahead. Elara Voss followed close, her rifle slung but ready. They had been tracking the Iron Serpents for 2 days now, moving through country that grew wilder and more unforgiving with every mile. The land here was a maze of canyons and dry riverbeds, the kind of place where a man could vanish for weeks without a trace. The sun was a white hammer overhead, baking the earth until it cracked. Even the wind felt dry, as if it had been stripped of all softness. By midday, they reached a narrow defile where the walls rose high and close, casting deep shadows. Rian dismounted, crouching to study the ground. 6 riders, he said. Heavy horses. They passed through here less than half a day ago. Elara scanned the cliffs above. Could be a trap. It's always a trap, Rian replied, mounting up again. They moved through the defile in silence, the sound of their horses' hooves echoing off the stone. At the far end, the land opened into a wide basin ringed by jagged ridges. In the center, half hidden by scrub and rock, was a cluster of low buildings, weathered wood, patched canvas roofs, and the glint of metal where rifles caught the sun. The Serpents' camp from this distance. Rian could see men moving between the buildings, leading horses, carrying crates. A watchtower stood at the northern edge, a lone figure scanning the horizon with a spyglass. Elara dismounted, pulling a small brass scope from her coat. She studied the camp for a long moment. At least 20 men, maybe more inside the buildings. And look there, she passed him the scope, unfocused on the largest building, a long, low structure with a corrugated roof. Outside, 2 men stood guard beside a wagon loaded with barrels. The barrels were marked with the same black serpent sigil he'd seen on the tokens, supplies. Rian said, "Or explosives, either way, they're moving them soon," Elara replied. They withdrew to the cover of a rock outcrop. Rian spread a rough map on the ground, sketching the camp's layout with the tip of his knife. "We can't take them head-on," he said. "Too many guns, too much open ground. So we cut the head off the snake," Elara said. Rian nodded. "The leader, whoever's running this, will be in that long building. We get in, take him out, and the rest scatter." They waited until nightfall. The desert cooled quickly, the heat bleeding away into the dark. The camp below was lit by a handful of lanterns, their glow barely reaching the edges of the basin. Rian and Elara moved like shadows, slipping from rock to rock until they reached the outer fence. A single guard patrolled the perimeter, his rifle slung carelessly. Rian stepped out of the dark, one hand clamping over the man's mouth, the other driving the hilt of his knife into the base of his skull. The guard sagged silently to the ground dot inside the camp. The air was thick with the smell of horses, oil, and sweat. They kept to the shadows, skirting the edge of the buildings, until they reached the long structure. Through a gap in the wall, Rian saw him, a tall man in a dark coat, his hair silver at the temples, speaking quietly to 2 lieutenants. On the table before them was a map of the territories, marked with black serpent sigils in at least a dozen towns. Elara's eyes met Rian's. This wasn't just a gang. This was an operation. Rian eased the door open, the hinges barely whispering. They slipped inside, moving toward the table. The leader looked up and smiled. "I was wondering when you'd get here," he said. The room exploded into motion. One lieutenant went for his gun, but Elara's rifle cracked, dropping him instantly. The other lunged at Rian, who sidestepped and drove his shoulder into the man's ribs, sending him crashing into the wall. The leader drew a pistol, but Rian was faster. His shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him back against the table. Papers and maps scattered to the floor. "You've been burning towns," Rian said, his voice low and cold. "Killing for someone else's power." "Who?" The leader's smile didn't falter, even with blood seeping through his coat. "You think killing me will stop it? We're just one coil of the serpent. Cut us here and another will tighten around your throat." Rian's jaw tightened. "Then I'll keep cutting." He raised his revolver, but before he could fire, a shout went up outside. Boots pounded toward the building. Elara grabbed the scattered maps, shoving them into her coat. "We need to move." Rian fired once more, the leader collapsing against the table. Then they were out the door, into the chaos of the camp. Gunfire erupted from the watchtower. Lanterns flared as men shouted orders. Rian and Elara sprinted for the fence, cutting down anyone who stepped into their path. They reached the outer edge just as a rifle cracked from the ridge above. The shot missed, but it was close enough to send splinters from the fence into Rian's face. They mounted their horses and rode hard into the night, the camp shrinking behind them. Only when they were miles away did they slow. Elara pulled the maps from her coat, spreading them on the ground. The black serpent sigils marked a path, not random, but deliberate. And at the center of that path was a single name, written in bold, deliberate script. Rian stared at it for a long moment. "I know that name." Elara looked up. "Who is it?" Rian's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of old scars. "The man who started all of this." The fire between them had burned low, its light flickering over the rough lines of the stolen map. The black serpent sigils marked towns and valleys like scars across the territories. But it was the name at the center that held Rian Calder's gaze. Cassian Roarke. Elara Voss watched him, her expression unreadable. "You know him?" Rian's jaw tightened. "I knew him. Once. The night seemed to press closer, the wind carrying the faint rustle of dry grass. Rian's voice was low, almost reluctant. Years ago, before the war, before I started running freight, I rode with a crew. Not outlaws, not exactly. We took jobs the law wouldn't touch, escorting caravans through bad country, guarding shipments no one else would guard. Cassian was our leader. Elara leaned forward slightly. What happened? Rian's eyes stayed on the map. He sold us out, took a contract from a mining syndicate, promised them safe passage through disputed land. But he didn't tell us the cargo was stolen from the people who lived there. When they came for it, we were caught in the middle. Half the crew died. The rest scattered. I walked away, and now he's running the Iron Serpents, Elara said. Rian nodded once. And burning towns to clear a path for something bigger. Cassian doesn't move without a plan. If these marks are right, he's carving a corridor, from the borderlands straight to the rail hub in BLACKSPIRE. Elara traced the route with her finger. That would give him control over half the freight in the territories, and the power to choke anyone who doesn't pay him. Rian added, they broke camp before dawn. The trail to BLACKSPIRE was long and dangerous, cutting through the salt flats, a barren expanse where the sun could kill a man faster than a bullet, and then into the jagged canyons of the Red Divide. By midday, the salt flats stretched around them in every direction, a blinding white sea under a merciless sky. The heat shimmered off the ground, distorting the horizon. Their canteens were half empty, and the horses moved with slow, deliberate steps. It was Elara who spotted the riders first, 3 of them, far behind, their shapes wavering in the heat haze. They're not pushing hard, she said. Scouts. Rian's eyes narrowed. Cassian knows we're coming. They pressed on, the sun sinking low and turning the flats into a mirror of fire. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the Red Divide, a labyrinth of canyons and cliffs where the wind howled like a living thing. They made camp in the shelter of a narrow gorge. The firelight danced on the canyon walls, throwing long, shifting shadows. Elara broke the silence. When we find him, what then? Rian didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames, the memories of betrayal and blood as sharp as the day they'd happened. Then I finished what should have been finished years ago. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that didn't belong, the faint clink of metal on stone. Rian's hand went to his revolver. We're not alone. From the darkness beyond the firelight, a voice called out, smooth, mocking, and far too familiar. Well now, if it isn't Rian Calder. I was wondering when you'd come looking. A figure stepped into the light, flanked by 2 armed men. His coat was black, his hair silver at the temples, and his smile was the same one Rian remembered from years ago. Cassian Roarke. Cassian Roarke didn't need to introduce himself. The moment Rian Calder saw him step into the firelight, the years between them collapsed into a single, searing instant. Betrayal, blood, and the bitter taste of dust in his mouth. Cassian looked almost untouched by time. The silver at his temples only sharpened the edges of his presence, and the faint lines at the corners of his eyes did nothing to soften the cold calculation in them. 2 armed men flanked him, their hands resting on their holstered pistols, eyes locked on Rian and Elara. You haven't changed much, Cassian said, his voice smooth as silk but carrying the weight of a hidden blade. Still standing, still stubborn, still on the wrong side. Rian rose slowly, the fire casting his shadow long across the ground. If the right side is the one you sold out, then I'm glad I'm not on it. Cassian's smile widened, but his eyes stayed hard. You never understood. Out here, survival isn't about honor, it's about power. I just learned the rules faster than you. Elara's voice cut through the space between them, sharp and steady, and you left a trail of bodies to prove it. Cassian turned his gaze to her, tilting his head slightly. And you are? His new shadow? Or just another name to be carved into the dirt beside him? Rian's hand drifted toward the worn grip of his revolver. You didn't come here to talk. What do you want? Cassian took a slow step forward. An offer. Walk away from this. Forget the map. Forget the serpents. You and your partner vanish, and I let you live. Rian's voice was low, steady. I'd rather you remember me. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. One of Cassian's men shifted, fingers twitching toward his gun. everything happened at once. Rian's revolver cleared leather in a blur, the muzzle flashing in the firelight. The first shot dropped the man to Cassian's right. Elara's rifle cracked a heartbeat later, sending the second sprawling into the dust. Cassian moved fast, retreating into the shadows beyond the fire's reach. Gunfire flared, the night exploding with sound and smoke. Rian caught a glimpse of him, the black coat, the glint of steel, but before he could fire, Cassian melted into the darkness between the rocks. "Don't chase him," Elara called, working the lever on her rifle. "He's drawing us in. There'll be more waiting." Rian's jaw clenched, but he stepped back, scanning the shadows. Somewhere out there, Cassian's laughter rolled low and mocking, carried on the wind like a promise. When the echoes faded, they searched the fallen men. In the pocket of one, Rian found a folded sheet of paper, a route marked in precise ink, with dates and supply points leading straight to BLACKSPIRE. Elara took it, tucking it into her coat. "Now we know where he's going." Rian looked into the dark where Cassian had vanished. "And we know exactly who we're going after." The wind off the red divide carried the smell of stone and dust, sharp enough to sting the back of the throat. Rian Calder and Elara Voss rode in silence, the canyon walls on either side rising like the ribs of some ancient beast. The map they'd taken from Cassian's men was folded in Rian's coat, but he didn't need to look at it. Every mile east brought them closer to BLACKSPIRE, and to the man who had turned his life into a ledger of debts and blood. The trail narrowed, forcing them into single file. Loose shale crunched under the horses' hooves, and the sound echoed in the stillness. Somewhere above, a hawk cried, the sound thin and distant. Elara broke the silence first. "He's not going to wait for us in BLACKSPIRE. He'll try to break us before we get there." Rian's eyes scanned the ridges. "Then we make sure we're the ones doing the breaking." They cleared the canyon by midday, the land opening into a stretch of badlands, jagged mesas, dry riverbeds, and scrub that rattled in the wind. The sun was high, the heat pressing down like a hand. That was when Rian saw it, a glint of metal on the ridge to their right. "Rifles," he said. The first shot came a heartbeat later, kicking up dust at Elara's stirrup. She swung down from her horse, rolling into cover behind a boulder. Rian followed, drawing his revolver. The ambushers were well placed for men, spread along the ridge, firing in measured bursts. They weren't trying to kill outright. They were herding them, forcing them toward the dry riverbed ahead. Rian's mind worked fast. The riverbed was a kill zone, no cover, no escape. He signaled to Elara, pointing toward a narrow cut in the ridge. She nodded, reloading her rifle. "On my mark," he said. She fired 3 quick shots, forcing the rifleman to duck. Rian sprinted for the cut, boots slipping on loose rock. Bullets whined past, one close enough to tear the edge of his coat. He reached the cut and hauled himself up, moving fast and low along the ridge. The first rifleman never saw him coming. Rian's revolver barked once, and the man crumpled. The second turned too late, his shot going wide before Rian's took him in the chest below. Elara dropped another with a clean shot through the shoulder. The last man fled, scrambling over the ridge and vanishing into the badlands. Rian rejoined her, breathing hard. "Scouts again. Cassian's keeping eyes on us." They pressed on, wary now. By late afternoon, the badlands gave way to rolling grassland, the wind bending it in long, slow waves. In the distance, the faint outline of BLACKSPIRE's rail tower rose against the horizon, a black finger pointing at the sky. They made camp in a shallow hollow, the grass whispering around them. The fire was small, the light barely enough to see by. Elara studied the map again. "If we take the main road, we'll be in BLACKSPIRE by tomorrow night. But it's open ground, too easy to be seen." Rian shook his head. "We cut through the old mining tunnels. Slower, but they'll never expect it." She looked at him. "You've been there before." "Once," he said, "and I swore I'd never go back." The wind shifted, carrying the faint, rhythmic sound of hooves. Not many, maybe 2 or 3. Close. Rian doused the fire with his boot. "We've got company." They waited in the dark, the sound of the riders growing louder. 2 figures emerged from the grass, their horses moving at a slow walk. The men wore the serpent sigil openly on their coats. One called out, his voice carrying in the stillness, Calder, Roarke says you're welcome to turn back. Last chance. Rian stepped into the moonlight, his revolver at his side. Tell Roarke I'll see him in Blackspire. The man's smile was thin. He's counting on it. They turned and rode off, disappearing into the night. Elara exhaled slowly. He's baiting you. Rian's gaze stayed on the dark horizon. Then I'll take the bait, and I'll make sure he chokes on it. Blackspire was a city of iron and smoke. The rail yard stretched like a steel spine through its heart, the air thick with the hiss of steam and the clang of metal on metal. Lantern light flickered off rain-slick cobblestones, and the night smelled of coal, oil, and the faint copper tang of blood waiting to be spilled. Rian Calder and Elara Voss rode in through the west gate just as the last freight train of the night screamed into the station. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every step of their horses brought them closer to the end. Cassian Roarke was here. They found him where Rian knew he would be, the old freight depot at the far end of the yard. Its windows dark, its doors chained. 2 Iron Serpent guards stood outside, rifles slung. Rian dismounted, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The guards barely had time to register his face before Elara's rifle cracked twice. Both men dropped without a sound. Inside, the depot was a cathedral of shadows. The high roof groaned in the wind, and the only light came from a single lantern hanging over a table in the center of the room. Cassian stood there, coat draped over his shoulders, a revolver resting on the table beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. "You made it," he said, his voice carrying easily in the cavernous space. "I wasn't sure you'd have the stomach for the last mile." Rian stepped forward, the boards creaking under his boots. "I've been walking this mile for years." Cassian's smile was thin. "And here we are, you, me, and the woman who thinks she can save you from yourself." Elara's voice was steady. "I'm not here to save him. I'm here to end you." Cassian's hand hovered over his revolver. "Then let's see who's faster." The world narrowed to the space between them. The hiss of steam outside, the slow drip of water from the roof, the pounding of blood in Rian's ears. Cassian moved first. The flash of his revolver lit the room, but Rian was already moving, the shot tearing through empty air. His own gun roared in reply, the bullet slamming into Cassian's shoulder and spinning him sideways. Cassian staggered, but didn't fall. He fired again, the round grazing Rian's ribs. Pain flared hot, but Rian kept coming, closing the distance. They collided in a crash of fists and steel, the revolvers clattering to the floor. Cassian's hands were quick, his strikes brutal, but Rian fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. A headbutt sent Cassian reeling. Rian grabbed him by the coat, driving him back against the table. The lantern rocked, shadows lurching across the walls. "This is for every man you left in the dirt." Rian growled. Cassian's hand darted for a hidden knife, but Elara's shot rang out, the bullet slamming into the blade and sending it spinning across the floor. Rian didn't hesitate. One final punch, all his weight behind it, sent Cassian crashing to the ground. He didn't get up. The depot was silent except for the sound of Rian's breathing. He stood over Cassian's still form, the years of anger and betrayal finally bleeding out into the cold air. Outside, the train whistle blew long, low, and final. Elara stepped up beside him. "It's over." Rian holstered his revolver. "For him, not for us." They walked out into the rain, the city lights glinting off the wet streets. Behind them, the depot stood dark and empty. The Serpent's head finally severed. Ahead, the rails stretched into the night, and Rian Calder kept walking. Dawn broke over Blackspire in muted gold, the rain-washed streets glistening like hammered copper. The city was quieter now, no shouts from the rail yard, no serpent sigils painted on walls. The Iron Serpents were gone, their leader buried in the silence he'd earned. Rian Calder stood on the edge of the platform, the steam from a waiting freight curling around his boots. His coat was still damp from the night before. His ribs ached from Cassian's bullet, but for the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Elara Voss joined him, her hat pulled low against the morning glare. She carried no rifle now, it was strapped to her saddle, along with the rest of her gear. "You could stay," she said, her voice calm but not without warmth. "Blackspire could use someone who knows how to keep the wolves out." Rian looked at the horizon. where the rails vanished into the pale light. I've spent too long chasing ghosts. Time to see what's past the next mile. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. East, then. East, he said. They walked together to where their horses waited, the city slowly waking behind them. The air smelled of wet earth and coal smoke, but beyond that, faint, almost fragile, was the scent of open country. As they rode out, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the night's shadows. Blackspire shrank behind them, its towers and rails fading into the haze. Ahead, the land stretched wide and unbroken, the kind of road that promised both trouble and freedom in equal measure. Rian didn't know what waited for them out there, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to find out. And beside him, Elara rode in easy silence, the two of them cutting a path into the bright, endless day.